We continue our opponent preview series with Stanford, and I'm pleased to be joined by John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News. And John, first off, I appreciate you joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
You bet. Now, we're talking to beat writers for all the teams on the schedule. Stanford doesn't really have a beat writer. I know that the Bay Area is such a busy place, and Stanford certainly not on the hierarchy of teams in the Bay Area. But you're probably as close to that program, at least being out there in San Jose than anybody else. So I appreciate you being here, and we'll talk about the Cardinal a little bit.
Sure thing. I mean, the coverage kind of tends to flow with the interest. And right now, given the state of the program, all you got to do is look at the home attendance to get a view of where interest lies in the Bay Area regarding Stanford. I mean, a decade ago, they were packing the stadium, and multiple media outlets had folks covering the team on a daily basis, myself included. But the last, what are we doing? 5 years or so, as the program has tailed off, so has the interest.
Yeah, the last time I was there actually was the pandemic year. Colorado played Stanford, and there was no fans, obviously, but there was a bunch of trees in the stands. I don't know if you remember that, but they filled the stands with some trees. But when Colorado first got into the Pac-12 12 years ago, Stanford was the standard bearer. I mean, they were kind of rolling. I think David Shaw was just taking over for Jim Harbaugh, but they were rolling, and they won 3 conference titles in those early years. Just in general, what's happened to Stanford the last several years? I mean, I think it's 14 wins in the last 4 years total.
Yeah, it's been rough for them. I think it's not all one thing, right? It would be easy if it was just one thing, but it's not. I mean, I think certainly you can question some of the staffing decisions David Shaw made in his final years. You can question a lot of the recruiting of the last few years. But at the same time, there's things going on, bigger picture regarding college football that are working against the program that really are more of an institutional issue than something specific to the football program itself, right? I mean, the transfer portal is making life almost impossible for them because they lose guys. This year alone, they lost, I think, 3 offensive linemen to Michigan and 1 to Oklahoma, but they're not getting anybody back. It's a one-way street for them. Cal's had the same problem, but to a lesser degree. So with the transfer portal, NIL, those things, everything that is pushing college football further toward a professional model economically is working against Stanford. And so you can't evaluate their performance on the field just based on the traditional metrics for coaching, for staffing, for recruiting, for strategy, game plan. You have to take the other stuff into account.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly the transfer portal is not the friend of Stanford that it is to Deion Sanders in Colorado. That's for sure. Is it, real quick, we'll get into more.
Well, but you know what? I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's a great point, right? Because Colorado changed its approach, right, to the portal and to how they're going to deal with credits for incoming kids. Stanford hasn't changed, and you could argue that Stanford shouldn't change and won't change given the overall mission of the university. But that right there is a great example of why it's falling further behind, because competitors are adapting. They have chosen not to.
Yeah. So I obviously I want to talk more 2023, but I will ask you, do you think Stanford will change to a point that they can allow their football team to compete better?
Well, Troy Taylor has said that, the administration has given him support with regard to the transfer portal, and that things will be different. I think we have to give it a couple of years. This year, I think they've got 3 incoming transfers. One of them is Ivy League. One of them is Florida International, and I can't remember the others. But it's not like they're getting guys from the SEC. So we'll kind of have to see. Same thing with their NIL approach. But there's a lot of pushback, among their alumni that just don't have interest in going all in with the new model for success in college football.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens if Stanford keeps falling further and they got 2-10, 1-11 type seasons. If the alumni gets upset enough, like, all right, this is embarrassing. We need to turn this around.
Well, and the thing is, that's what happened almost 20 years ago. They had a 1-win season in 2006. And it was so embarrassing for the university that they made changes. They hired Jim Harbaugh. They upgraded the salary pool for the assistant coaches, and they found housing for assistant coaches and invested in the program. And that sent them on their way to that decade of tremendous success. Now, they do need, if they want to win, they need to make changes. They're different changes now than they were back then.
Yeah.
They are not just plowing money into football. They are much more of the academic variety. But it's kind of all, the circle has come full. They're in some ways back to where they were in 2006 relative to their competition. We'll see if they change.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I guess that's similar in regard to that is, they go out and hire Jim Harbaugh, who had success at San Diego. Well, now they've hired Troy Taylor, who had great success at Sacramento State. And I want to get your opinion on that. I loved that hire. I mean, Troy Taylor to me was on the list for Colorado. I mean, I don't know if they considered him, but I would have loved to have seen him at Colorado. I loved what he did at Sacramento State. What did you think of that hire for Stanford?
I think it was a good hire. I agree with you totally. It's interesting. Stanford hired a Cal guy to run its football program. And Cal in this spring hired a Stanford guy to run its basketball program, Mark Madsen. No, I thought Troy Taylor was a very good hire, especially given the candidate pool, right? I mean, that's given the state of affairs, tough situation there. And I think he's a good coach. And I think he's going to make upgrades soon or immediately. We'll see the fruits of that, in terms of their tactics on the field and the coaching. But I also feel like, and their recruiting has improved immediately. Their recruiting had just, some of the decisions they've made on that front the last few years were just mind-boggling. Yeah. But Taylor is so far behind with his depth chart, especially on the lines of scrimmage. They have quarterback questions. I just don't know what the ceiling is going to be his first year or two. But I totally agree that given their options, he was a very smart hire.
Yeah, and his offense. I mean, he's obviously a really good, offensive mind.
Really
I believe,
good.
Yeah, he's going to be the coordinator this year too, right?
Yes, he is. He's the quarterback's coach, the offensive coordinator, and the head coach.
Yeah. So sort of Mike Leach like in that regard. But that offense has been very successful elsewhere. He used to be the OC at Utah. Had great success there. Is that something that you're excited to see? Is like what he does with that offense? I mean, it was obviously a very, not Colorado bad, but I mean, it was not a very good offense the last several years.
No, nobody's been Colorado. It was predictable. It was predictable. That was the thing. I don't know. I am curious to see philosophically what he does. Right? We know what he did at Sac State and other places, and he likes to throw the ball. When Stanford was dominating the conference, it was because of a incredibly old school approach, right? Running game, multiple tight ends, pounding offense, bruising offensive line, giving the ball to Toby Gerhart or Tyler Gaffney 30, 40 times a game. And they were different. That made Stanford different. It made them a difficult matchup because teams weren't used to facing that style. And Stanford can recruit offensive linemen. That is kind of their target recruiting position is offensive line because those guys are smart and they can get into school. So I don't know. We'll see. Can they succeed with more of a Troy Taylor offense? It'll be interesting to see because that kind of offense relies more on the perimeter play, and receiver has traditionally not been a position that Stanford has been able to recruit very well. So it'll be that in that way, philosophically, it's going to be interesting to compare what he does to what they did when they were successful.
Yeah, certainly if they're throwing up passing yards and points, be more likely to recruit good receivers and quarterbacks, things like that. But at quarterback, it looks like Ari Patu is going to be the guy. He was a 4-star coming out of high school a couple years ago, a dual threat guy, not a ton of experience. So what do you know about Ari?
We don't know much. He's got a few passes thrown in games the last few years. I have no idea. I honestly don't, and they don't have much depth. Their quarterback room is not in good shape right now, and which is similar to what it was when Harbaugh took over. And he was able to recruit Andrew Luck to get things turned around. But quarterback is one of several positions where there's a lot of question marks. We have no idea if Patu can do it over the course of a season. I'm sure that Taylor will do his best to tweak the offense to the strengths of his quarterback, but I honestly, I don't know. I'd just be taking a wild guess. We have no idea.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting season at Stanford. And, they start off with a couple of road games at Hawaii, then at USC, the traditional one, and then a bunch of home games. And then they have a bye week before they come to Colorado on a Friday night. I know that, who knows with this Stanford team, but what are you kind of expecting CU fans are going to see out of Stanford when they get here in Boulder for a Friday night?
We'll see. I think that they have questions about their depth. So, like Colorado, it'll be interesting to see what kind of health they're in at that point. The schedule is actually, with Hawaii, it's a little bit easier than it's been. Stanford has not done itself favors. There have been times when they played only Power 5 opponents, when their September is just completely stocked with road games. So we'll see. I don't think that it's reasonable to expect Taylor to get this team into a bowl game. I don't know that even 5-7 is reasonable, but they should be a little bit more competitive than they've been. I mean, they have, especially in November the last 2 years, they have just gotten steamrollered. So I think they'll be a little bit more competitive, but he needs 3 or 4 years. With other schools, you can get the ship turned in 1 or 2 years because of the transfer portal.
Yeah.
But Stanford is still on the old time frame. It's like geologic time with them, right? So I think that the fair thing to do is wait till at least after year 3 with Taylor, and maybe even after year 4. If we use Harbaugh as the guide, then there should be third year should see a noticeable uptick, but we'll see.
Yeah, and we're not going to get into this now, but I know you cover a lot of the Pac-12 stuff. We'll even see what conference Stanford's in that third year for Troy Taylor, and what conference Colorado's in. It could be wildly different 3 years from now, but that's a topic for another day, John. And I appreciate you joining me. I know you got to run, but we'll see what happens. Stanford's going to be interesting to watch. Colorado's going to be interesting to watch. Two of those probably bottom tier teams in the conference that have that potential to maybe surprise some people this year.
Yeah, and how Stanford and Colorado do is going to have a big impact on the top of the conference, right? I mean, it's a zero-sum game with wins and losses, and you can't be really strong at the top and also be strong at the bottom. And last year, there were some bad teams, and that led to however many there were, 4 or 5 teams getting double-digit wins because they had teams to beat. If the bottom is better, that's going to affect the top. So it's going to be real interesting how that whole dynamic unfolds.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate it. And I know everybody will be watching you for your general Pac-12 coverage as well. So I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Brian.